Ever notice how ads always pop up at the worst moments? When the killer's identity is about to be revealed. During that perfect meditation flow. On Amazon Music, we believe in keeping you in the moment. That's why we've got millions of ad-free podcast episodes, so you can stay completely immersed in every story, every reveal, every breath. Download the Amazon Music app and start listening to your favorite podcasts ad-free, included with Prime.
What is the matter with Democrats? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. You know, we just passed the mark of an assassination of one of the conservative world's biggest, most influential voices, Charlie Kirk. And against that backdrop, we have wars going on between Israel and Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and basically Iran. And we still have the Democrats advocating a two-state solution, talking about peace can be put on the table if only Benjamin Netanyahu would lay down arms and tell his IDF to stand down and strike a deal with the devil, right? Strike a deal with the devils in Hamas, the devil called Hamas. So you see stuff like that, and then you see things like the transgender movement that just continues, even in the face of poll after poll and survey after survey, showing that the American people, by and large, are not in favor of boys going into girls' bathrooms and pretending as if they're girls. And then you have the radicalization that we just saw on college campuses with the anti-Semitism and the pro-Palestinian protesters, which is really to say pro-Hamas protesters, which is really to say pro-terrorist factions on college campuses. And, you know, with all this going on, you have Zoran, right? Mamdani up in New York, still making gains. An open socialist, which is to say an open communist, is making gains big time as the next mayor of New York City. So much, in fact, that the governor of the state of New York, Kathy Hochul, just endorsed him for mayor. Think about that. The Democrats endorsed an open socialist, which is to say open communist in America. So I ask you, what's the matter with the Democrats? Before I get into more of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt. Yes, you can. You can get it. You may get it at edify.app, at Real Life Network. That is the faith-based news platform of Pastor Jack Hibbs's Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills Church in California. Head pat for me for saying that, right? Saying that tongue twister of a name. Head pat for me. It's the faith-based outreach, news outreach of his church in California, and it's a great site. You know what? It really necessary in today's darkness. If you're trying to make sense of what's going on just in this last week of news, just in this last couple weeks of news, go to Real Life Network and check out some of the podcasts and video blogs and offerings they have there. I'm happy to say Bold and Blunt has been among its lineup for a very long time now. So you can get Bold and Blunt there. Of course, you can subscribe to Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com. Just go to the newsletter section and enter your email address, and you will get not just Bold and Blunt, my podcast, delivered to your email box 3 times a week. Well, my podcast comes out twice a week, but you'll get the email 3 times a week, and it contains both my podcasts as well as all the commentaries that I write at the Washington Times, as well as whatever video versions of my Bold and Blunts I do. I just did one with Gal Kalev. He is a colleague who lives in Israel who traveled to America, and I interviewed him right in front of the Capitol about what's going on in Israel and what he sees on the ground in Israel. And you know what? It's favorable to Trump. So hint, hint, you want to check that out. But you can also get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are available. I'm not the only one asking what's the matter with Democrats. As a matter of fact, Dissent magazine posed that very question in a headline in fall of 2024, which, you know what, I got to admit here, I took my opening question from this magazine when I said, what's the matter with Democrats? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. It was basically, I was trying to think, what do I want to talk about today? And I was scouring around and I came across this headline, what's the matter with Democrats? And I thought, you know what? What is the matter with Democrats? I bet that's something that Bold and Blunt listeners would like to consider as well. So, what's the matter with Democrats? This is a headline posed in the fall of 2024, as I said, Dissent magazine. And while we're all pondering that question, pondering the answer to that question, let me just read a little bit from this essay. 2024, as I said, it's been a hard year for the Democrats, well before concerns over President Joe Biden's age rocked the presidential campaign. The party was forced to confront a grim political reality. Voters did not decisively prefer them to the Republicans. Oh, imagine that. Imagine that voters were a little bit dissatisfied with the puppet Joe Biden as president. And they were a little bit upset that those who saw that movie Weekend at Bernie's, they thought, well, what's the difference between Bernie and Biden? And they really had a hard time. It was a head scratcher, right? It was a head scratcher. They really had a hard time coming up with any difference, except maybe Biden was better dressed. I don't know. You know, he didn't have the beachwear that Bernie had. Bernie, as you remember, was dead. And he was carted around all day long by two guys. They just dragged him around. And sort of like Joe Biden's aides, right? So, yeah, small wonder that voters did not decisively prefer them, Joe Biden's party, to Republicans. Back to this piece. Back to this piece. Try that again, huh? See, you make one gain, it's one step forward, two steps back, right? I say Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills Church in California, and I can't even say this next sentence that I said. All right, one step forward, two steps back. Let's take another couple steps forward. Despite Donald Trump's criminal conviction, open bigotry, history of sexual assault, semi-incoherent ramblings. Oh, this is definitely a leftist piece. I should have read this piece before reading it to you. Really? Donald Trump's semi-incoherent ramblings? Following the sentence about Joe Biden where you didn't mention any of his incoherent ramblings? That's all Joe Biden did. And then he would do it in a whisper. He'd drop his head and he'd start whispering, hoping you didn't notice how stupid he sounded. I'm sorry, but that's the only word that comes to mind. He was a rambling case of stupid. That was Joe Biden. And general unfitness for office, again talking about Donald Trump, despite January 6th, the end of national abortion rights, and the stumbles of the Republican House majority, despite a notable drop in violent crime and an economy that is performing statistically as well. Forgive me, please. I just came off of 2 trips to Israel back to back, right? So the fact that I can't pronounce statistically on the first try, well, I did it on the second try, so kudos to me. As well as it has in years, the best Democrats could hope for in November was a slim victory. Whatever effect swapping Biden for Harris might have, it won't alter the underlying reality. The Democrats are roughly as popular as Trump's Republicans, and the general election could be decided by a coin flip. This is interesting because, excuse me, the writer of this is just so in the camp of Democrats, right? That he doesn't even try to disguise his utter contempt for Donald Trump, right? He just puts things out there as if it's fact, right? Incoherent ramblings. I mean, Donald Trump is pretty coherent, right? Rarely are you left listening to Donald Trump wondering, I wonder what he meant by that. The guy's blunt, right? The guy gives new meaning to the word blunt. So to call out Trump for semi-incoherent ramblings, it's kind of an outing of yourself as just being such a butt kisser of the Democrat Party. That being said, The reason this piece is interesting is because it's written by such an obvious butt kisser of the Democrat Party. But at the same time, this writer can't understand why the Republicans are nonetheless winning against Democrats, right? The general idea here, the general takeaway is that Republicans are beating Democrats so badly that even the butt kissers of the Democrat Party have to acknowledge that. There's no way that they can sugarcoat it. There's no way they can hide it. And this from a party that tried to hide that Joe Biden was about as dead as Bernie in Weekend at Bernie's. I mean, think how big the Republicans must be winning against Democrats. The Republicans must be beating Democrats. That someone like that, like this author, this writer, has to acknowledge it. Can't spin it any other way. And really, the bigger takeaway is that if a leftist admits that Republicans are winning against Democrats, then Republicans must be winning even more than the leftists admit. They say 10 points, it's probably more like 50 points. They say 20 points, it's probably more like 70 points. So that's really the takeaway. And so when you ask the question, what's the matter with Democrats? Well, what comes to mind first and foremost is they're incapable of truthful self-reflection, right? Yes, that's what first popped in my mind. They are utterly incapable of acknowledging their mistakes, their errors, their skewed, flawed thinking. And the idea, the fact, really, not the idea, the fact that their viewpoints are not representative of the American people, the American spirit, or what the American people want, meaning what the voters want. So when you say, what's wrong with Democrats? Well, they're not Democrats, they're communists. So, that's one big red flag right there. Did you see what I did there? Red flag. Anyhow, I have with me a great guest. She is a better talker than I because her whole world is about talking and putting forth smart, sharp, insightful analysis. You know who she is. I barely have to say her name, right? If you heard her voice, you'd be like, I know who this is. But I'll go ahead and give her the introduction anyhow. Just maybe there's somebody out there who doesn't recognize her voice. Mary Walter from Mary Walter Radio and from all over the conservative world. I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blonde. So great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me back. I love being on the podcast, and I could talk to you for hours, as we have done already.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. We were just talking. I'm like, well, we better hit record because all the good stuff is being discussed now. We both just came back from Israel. We were on the same trip together, and we both have some really interesting takeaways from Israel. Just talk a little bit about your impressions, because it was your first time there, yes?
It was my first time, and I will tell you, I was so nervous about going, and I just kept saying to my husband, I don't want to do this. Why did I say
Why?
this? I don't want to do this.
Why?
I was afraid, and I think, and I know people who were invited on the trip and did not go because they were afraid. And I'm so glad I went. Once we were there, yes, we had security with our group, but my husband came when you guys left. Everybody else left. My husband came, and we stayed for a week by ourselves, no security, nothing. I was more afraid going into Manhattan 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
Than I was walking around Jerusalem by myself. Like we stayed in Jerusalem, and that was like our headquarters. That was our home base. And I was not scared at all. And I think that's a really bad perception that Americans have, because what do we hear? Oh, Israel's shooting rockets off. Oh, there's rockets being shot into Israel. Oh, the sirens never went off in the 2 weeks we were there. So that's a perception issue that I think Americans have to get over, because it is an amazing country. The people were so nice. And I just think you're missing such an opportunity by not going. It's wonderful.
So I know that you're a woman of faith, so you must have gleaned a little bit deeper wisdom into biblical truths while you were walking about Jerusalem. Did you look at Jerusalem with religious eyes, or was it more just historical?
So the first half of the trip, the first week that I was there, when you were there, when we were on a diplomatic mission, we did see some historic places, but it was a different focus. Then when my husband came and we had a tour guide who was fantastic. I'll give you his name if anybody wants it. He was fantastic and was not that expensive. But anyway, that was so it was a different focus, the second half of the trip from the first half of the trip. So the first half of that trip, when we did get to go into the old city of Jerusalem, and we got to go into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and go into the tomb, I was in there with Tim Pool, and both of us are Catholic, and we both came out of there with tears just streaming down our eyes. Like it's at the time, I don't think the enormity of it really hit me, but when we were walking along the steps of Jesus, we were so fortunate to be able to go into this path that they found the original street to Jerusalem from the Siloam Pool, that we know that Jesus and the apostles walked up and down, and being walking on the same stones that we know they walked on, and that's not open to the public yet. So we were so blessed to be able to do that. That was kind of a big deal, but it wasn't until my husband and I explored, and he and I went on the 2 tours. We went to Bethlehem. We went to, not Bethlehem, we went to Nazareth. We went to Capernaum. We went to the Sea of Galilee. And our guide really put the Bible together for us. And now when we watch certain things, we're like, okay, and we know where it is now. We see it. And we both came back and said, especially with what happened with Charlie Kirk, like, I feel so differently now. I feel so much deeper connected to my religion and to my spirituality, having been there and seen it and touched certain things. While I was there, it didn't hit me, but now that I've been home for a couple of weeks, it's really sunk in, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And the same thing happened to me when I first went. It was a flurry, right? Trying to take in everything. But it wasn't until after, when I got home and I was reading the Bible, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was there. I stood right there. And one of the first things I wonder, because I've been there a few times now, and you've been there once. And I remember when it was my first time and I came home, I was a little bit confused, because in Jerusalem, right, depending on who your guide is, or depending on who's telling the story, it's a little bit different. For instance, like the Catholic understanding of where Jesus was crucified is different from the Protestant understanding, right? So does that confuse you at all? Are you a little bit puzzled?
It doesn't confuse me at all.
I was very confused when I came home. Was this the Jewish version or the Catholic or the so?
Well, do you remember we had a tour guide, and I found this so fascinating to address what you're talking about. So for me, I wasn't. I was like, this is what the Catholic believe. This is what I'm told. This is the place. So fine. So for me, I'm okay. But when we had the one tour guide of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, she was so smart, that wonderful woman. Remember her?
Oh, yeah.
And at the end of it, and she was telling us, well, we know that this is true, so we know that this is where Jesus walked, and we know this, and we know that. And somebody asked the question, like, if you know all of this, and you know this is all proof of Jesus, how are you Jewish? Remember that?
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
I don't remember who asked the question. I thought, that's a fantastic question, because I was thinking the same thing. She's like, yes, this is undeniable proof that this is where Jesus was crucified. I'm like, and this is where Jesus rose from the dead. I'm like, wait, what? Like, how? But yet, so she said, well, some of us believe Jesus was a prophet, but we don't believe he was the Messiah. And I was like, okay, so I think everybody approaches it maybe in their own way.
Right. And whether you can be an atheist, for crying out loud, and still glean a lot from a trip to Jerusalem or a trip to Israel, because it's all historical anyhow. And, just to sidestep to a different topic, but a little bit related, all of Israel right now is grieving for Charlie Kirk, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting to see. I get a lot of emails from people over there and organizations that put out statements. You must get the same. Are you surprised by the worldwide influence that Charlie Kirk seems to have had?
Yes. I really am. Now, I follow Charlie Kirk. I got to know him when I would not know him like on a personal level. It was really a work relationship when I was in Washington, D.C. You know, we met him a couple times, met him at events, that kind of thing. Great guy. But I watched his videos. I enjoyed his videos because it helped me become a better, not arguer, but better engaged with people when they come after you, because I do talk radio, so a lot of times you have to be able to engage with people, and I thought that the way that he engaged was so brilliant and so sane, if you will, right? He was very methodical about the way he went about his arguments, and so I learned from him, and I enjoyed his videos. Israel, I'm not as much surprised about, because they are more conservative. Like, they love Trump. When we were there,
Right.
they love Trump, right? They love him.
They did.
So they love Trump. So it makes sense that they would like Charlie Kirk. But it's really, and I'm sure you saw this, it's really the young people, mostly young boys, but also young women, who are mourning Charlie Kirk, and their parents are like, "What are you like? Who is this guy?" And it's the older generation that is learning from their children who Charlie Kirk is. I mean, because I can't say was at this point, I just can't yet, but who he is. And the other thing that was amazing to me is the revivals that are happening all over the world. And they're going hand in hand. And to me, this is so much deeper. Again, having just come back from the Holy Land, so maybe it's hitting me a little bit harder, and maybe I'm reading way too much into it. But people taking this assassination and using it to drive them back to faith is huge to me.
Yeah, it's huge to me, and it just shows that, one person can really make a massive difference, right? And you really don't know. You don't know how expansive your influence is. You don't know who you're touching. And if you just look at his life, it's astounding to me, some of the people and some of the organizations from faraway parts that are issuing statements, mourning his death and his and trying to keep his legacy alive.
Yes, yeah, I saw one from like somewhere in like Kenya, right? And I was like, how do you know who Charlie Kirk is? But these young men knew who he was. So this gives me faith in Gen Z, because they are the ones who have really arisen from this, and they were always there, but I think this has given them a cause and a purpose, and for a generation that really felt like they didn't have one. So I have hope.
Yeah, and it really puts a dagger to the heart of all those surveys and polls that show socialism has been really resoundingly embraced by the younger generations, because you can't try to carry forth Charlie Kirk's legacy and embrace socialism at the same time. Those two things can't coexist.
Right. Listen, do I think? Well, the other thing, to that point, I do think there is obviously the far left part of their party that is just in crazy town. They're socialists, borderline communists, anarchists. Those people are still going to be there. Those are the ones who are celebrating. Those are the ones who I think are really, really lost. I just don't think they found their purpose. They're lost. They're angry, and they're lashing out. But I do think this really whittled away at their base, because people were so disgusted by the reaction of so many on the left, including some politicians, that I saw so many videos from parents who said their kids have explained to them who Charlie Kirk was, and I saw one woman who said, "I'm a moderate Democrat, and I can't align myself with them anymore. They've gone so far left." So I think, if nothing else, it's whittling away at the Democrat voter share.
It strikes me listening to you talk. I remember after September 11th, when for the first week, right, Democrats and Republicans came together. They stood on the steps of the Capitol and sang Kumbaya songs and all that.
Right.
And it wasn't but a few days after that the political division started again. So I wonder, what do you think's going to happen here after after the initial shock and awe of his assassination wears off and the grieving process goes its natural way, what first do you see as the future of Turning Point USA? And larger than that, what would be the future of the conservative movement in America?
I think Turning Point USA grows. They have, what did they have? Something over 30,000 requests for chapters at schools.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's huge. So I think it grows. As I said before, I think this generation is looking for a purpose. I think they've been very lost. And especially young men. Again, these young kids have been told that just by being masculine, they're toxic. And if they're white, you only got where you are because of your white privilege. And we've really beaten them down and trying to elevate girls. We instead pushed our young boys down and told them they're worthless and they're nothing. So now they have a cause. So I do see Turning Point growing huge. I don't see his wife Erica allowing that to fall away. So I think you see a surge for Turning Point USA. As for conservatism in the United States, I do see it growing, because I do think that especially younger people, older people, listen, let's say the 40 plus crowd, 35 plus crowd, I don't think that it really was shock for. I don't think it was as disturbing for them as it was for the under 35 crowd who adored Charlie. And we just didn't realize how much they adored him. Like in the videos from parents who's like, I had no idea who he was. And my kids were like, Mom, kid, this is who he was, talking about their sons coming home crying, their daughters still crying. I think there's a generational divide, but I do think that that's going to help shift the pendulum back. The pendulum always swings back to center. And I think this helps really push the pendulum maybe past center a little bit more to the conservative side.
I really want to get your insights on this, because I've been having a conversation with a friend for a couple of days now, and I'm really interested in how you would respond to this. So I agree with you about the growth of the chapters in Turning Point USA, but the big question I was having this discussion about was the longer term future of Turning Point USA. Because if you look at what Charlie Kirk did, right, he wasn't just a figurehead. Turning Point USA was him. He was the one that engaged on college campuses, right? And you can't just slide anybody into that role and have the same results, have the same growth. So right now, Turning Point USA is having an explosion, and part of that is reaction to the atrocity that just occurred, right? But a year down the line, when they go to put a new leader in, who would be the next Charlie Kirk that could be Charlie Kirk? Or should Turning Point USA even try that? You see what I'm saying? I'm just curious. What do you say?
Well, it's like, you can't replace, Paul McCartney had he, the first one out of the Beatles, right? So, but I don't think that they'll try that. I don't know. But, Officer Tatum, you see him on X a lot, and he's all over the place. He had been doing the same thing with Turning Point USA. Riley Gaines had been out a couple of times. So they have had other people come out, some with Charlie, some on their own. So you can tell, it seems to me as if Charlie had already started the process of bringing more people out so that Turning Point could grow, because he can only be in one place at one time, right? So I wonder if they continue doing that. There's a young man named Brylan Hollyhand. I didn't know who he was a year ago, but he got booked on a show that I was working on. He was a guest. I'm like, this kid's really brilliant. Like, this kid's really smart. And now he's come out and he has been out in public and he's been speaking. And so I think that what they're going to try to do is get Riley Gaines, get Officer Tatum, get like Brylan, get several of them as it grows. I mean, Charlie was just in South Korea a couple of days before he was assassinated, and they had this huge revival, and they were praying over him in South Korea. So he can't do that. So I think he already had maybe the mechanisms in place to expand. At least that's what it looked like to me, and I, of course, could be wrong. Nobody knows, really, I guess.
Well, I just hope it's the spirit that survives, like in America, right? It doesn't
Right.
matter who's in the White House because in the end, it's the spirit of America that carries forth. And I hope the same for Turning Point USA. Let,
I
let,
do.
let's talk a little bit about Trump because Trump is grieving, of course, and his family is grieving the death of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
But he's in a position of actually responding and making sure that this doesn't happen again or trying to. And he's come out and said that he wants to clear these radical elements from the left. How do you think that's going to be received in America? Of course, the left is going to go nuts at it, but do you think conservatives are going to go wishy washy on that?
Well, when you say conservatives, it depends on who you're talking about.
Yes.
If we're talking about our elected officials, yes, because they're useless. So they don't know how to fight. They never will fight, and this is why I'm not a registered Republican because I don't sign up for a team that doesn't come to win. So them no. But I do think that there is. I want to say an awakening. It's almost like they went too far this time, And so I would like to see Trump has got all these fighters, and we've only got 3 years, really 3 years and 2 months,
Yes.
to
Yes.
left. And let's go after them legally. Right? If there were people on Discord who knew about this, let's see what we can charge them with, if anything. Why didn't I? And I don't know if there's something you could charge someone with who didn't come and tell you about a crime, right?
Mm.
I don't know if that exists, but his roommate's cooperating. Did this roommate know that this was going to happen and maybe could be charged as an accessory to murder? I've heard that going around for knowing full well that this was being planned and being told that this is being planned. How much involvement did the roommate have? But I say we go after them legally. Let's do what we have to do. Let's do to them what they would do to us, because they're very good at the lawfare. They're very good at finding a legal way to go after their political enemies. Look what they did to Donald Trump.
Yep.
So I say we learn from them because they're very good at it, and let's do it that way, because there is an element of the left that is very vicious and very vile. Look at the people who are losing their jobs now and they're crying. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm old enough to remember when you were telling me that, yes, you could have free speech, but it has consequences. Now all of a sudden you don't think free speech should have consequences? It's weird how that changed.
Yeah, they are hypocrites and expert gaslighters, really. And
Yes.
let,
Luckily, so am I, so I see it coming.
well, let me finish with this last question because I know I'm already over time and everything, but I just want to know. I thought after one assassination of Trump, the left would calm their rhetoric. No, they didn't. And then the
Nope.
second assassination attempt, no, they're still going. At what point do the Democrats realize that what they're selling is just an outrage to the American people? At what point do they return to normalcy?
It depends on what you think normal is for them.
Center?
I-
Bill Clinton days. I'll take that at this
No,
point.
I don't see that. I don't see that happening, because look at Mamdani
Yes.
in New York. Kathy Hochul just endorsed him.
I know.
To me, Democrats and Republicans are the opposite when it comes to power. Democrats will take a crumb, right? They'll take whatever they can get. Republicans are like, well, it's not a whole loaf of bread, so I'll just be hungry, right? That's what they do. So Democrats will ask for, they're excellent negotiators. If you read the art of the deal, they will ask for I don't know, a mile, but they'll take a city block if they can get it. Whereas Republicans don't play that way. So I don't see them, quote unquote, normalizing. I think that they've allowed the far left of the party to really grow and gain power out of their zest, their zeal, their need for more and more power and control. They have to have full power. That's what they want. And so when that's what you want, you're never going to stop. I just don't think they will. They're never held accountable for anything, right? Well, who was that? Who was LaMonica MacGyver from New Jersey? Yay! Who's on video shoving an assaulting an ICE officer? We had 5 Republicans who voted against bringing her up in Congress for censorship. Five Republicans voted against it. So Democrats would never do that. So as long as we keep allowing them to get away with lying in front of Congress, never holding them accountable for their actions, why would they moderate?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I look at the Democrat Party today and I just see demonic forces. I mean, honestly,
Yes, thank you for saying that.
that's the only way I can make sense of their action, because it's not for political wins. They're just demons, it seems like. But, well, Mary Walter, I want to thank you so much for your insights. Mary Walter Radio, where are you going to be hosting next? Because I know you're all over the place.
I am all over the place. Well, tomorrow night is my podcast, and Cheryl's been on my podcast.
Yep.
Just look for Mary Walter Radio on Getter, YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Spreaker. And coming up, I was supposed to be on Newsmax today, but President Trump bumped me, which I thought was really rude.
Let's talk to him. We'll send him a memo.
Yes. On Thursday, I am in from 9 a.m. to noon for David Webb on Sirius XM Patriot Channel.
Oh, good
Excuse
one.
me. Hold on. No, that's wrong. Friday, I'm in for... Oh, here I am. Thursday. Sorry, I was a week behind myself. Thursday, I'm in for Stacey Washington from the Truth.
Our friend
She was with us
Stacey.
on the trip.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, that's 9 p.m. to midnight. I had the wrong one. 9 p.m. to midnight on Sirius XM Patriot Channel. So that's this week.
Do you have your own website, your marywalter.com type of thing?
There is a marywalter.com, but I haven't updated that thing in
know.
a dog's year. But I am on X at Mary Walter Radio, and I am on Facebook. If you look for, again, Mary Walter Radio, I do have a professional page there that I always post my schedule on. And if I ever get an assistant, I'll be on Instagram too, but I really need help. I need staff. And so far that hasn't happened. I've asked Santa several years in a row, and he's never brought me an assistant.
You know what? Social media is a full-time job. I'm the same as you. And updating my website, I got so behind on it, I got rid of the website. I was like, this is just too much. Yes. Yes.
It's like you're traveling all over the place. Every time I turn around, you post something, I'm like, are you in Israel again?
Yes.
It's like, yes.
Yes. A pity party for us. You know, we're so busy doing all these great things, we can't post to social media, right? So
Exactly,
poor us.
exactly.
Mary Walter, thank you so much. Come back on my show anytime, and I look forward to the next time we're in Israel together.
Yes, and I will be speaking to you hopefully real soon on my end as well. Thank you, Cheryl.
Can't wait. All right, bye. And that's another Bold and Blunt. Remember, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. In the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.